First up, we have Rocky Mountain Maple. When you're trying to identify Rocky Mountain Maple, there's three things you want to look at. You want to look at the bark, you want to look at the buds, and you want to look at the leaves. Now, the bark is easily the most distinguishing feature of Rocky Mountain Maple because the bark is bright red to dark maroon, and it stands out really well against the gray backdrop of most winter plants. So you can't see it so well from here, but if we bring the plant a little bit closer, you can really see just how red this bark is. So right there, it is very, very distinctive. And on this branch, you can see the buds. Now, the buds of Rocky Mountain Maple are opposite, which means they're directly across from each other, two to a pair. And they're fairly small, they're rounded, and they're also bright red, similar to the bark. Now, newer buds are going to be hugging the branch, like these ones are right here, and older buds are going to each have their own little stem. So these buds are going to get larger as we get closer to spring, but during the winter, they are fairly small. The leaves of Rocky Mountain Maple are usually fairly easy to spot because they are bright yellow and really stand out against the background of the bark. The leaves, for the most part, are going to be somewhat curled up and hard to see, but you'll get lucky sometimes and see leaves that show the distinctive maple leaf pattern with the three lobes and the lightly serrated edges. And you can often see from a distance just how many leaves are attached to a tree just because they are bright yellow and they stand out fairly well. So you can see a couple right there. There's one right there, and a couple over there. Another thing you can occasionally see when you're trying to identify Rocky Mountain Maples are the seed pods that will sometimes stay on during the winter. Now, most of the Rocky Mountain Maples I've looked at don't have the seed pods attached, but when they do stand out fairly well. You can see some seed pods hanging down right here, and right over there, and some right there. They're that classic helicopter seed shape. Right here we have Western Serviceberry, also known as Saskatoon. When you're trying to identify Western Serviceberry during the winter, the best thing to look at are the buds, because the buds are very large, brightly colored, and can often be seen from a distance. Now, this camera doesn't pick it up too well, but if we get closer to the plant, you can really see how distinctive these buds are. Let's see here. Now, these buds, they are fairly large, pointed, and they are green to pink. Now, as we get closer to spring here in Montana, these buds are going to be more green because they're getting ready to produce leaves. But sort of earlier in the winter, maybe December, January, these buds are going to be more pink. So you can see those buds right here. Western Serviceberry will sometimes keep its leaves on during the winter, but it's not too common. If you're lucky, you might be able to see a small brown leaf attached to the tree that's going to be maybe about the size of the tip of your thumb, lightly serrated and oval shaped. Another thing you can occasionally see on Western Serviceberry are the little berries that it makes during the spring. Sometimes these berries will persist on the tree during the winter. It's not particularly common, but you can usually see them as these very small little ovals that are attached to the tree that are going to be dark maroon to near black. Here we have a cluster of common chokecherries growing together. When you're trying to identify common chokecherry during the winter, similar to Western Serviceberry, the best way to do so is by looking at the buds. Now, the buds of common chokecherry aren't particularly flashy or large, but they are very different than the buds on either Western Serviceberry or Rocky Mountain Maple. So if we take a closer look on the plant, take a look at the buds, you can see that the buds are small, brown, and pointed, whereas the buds on Rocky Mountain Maple are going to be red, and the buds on Western Serviceberry are going to be pink. Now, these buds, for the most part, they're going to hug the branch, and they are going to be adjacent, which means the buds aren't going to be directly across from each other. Earlier in the winter, these buds are going to be much smaller. As we get closer to spring, these buds are getting a little bit bigger as they're getting ready to produce leaves, but in general, the buds are going to be very small, very pointed, and very brown. Another thing we can look at when we're trying to identify common chokecherry is the bark. Now, the bark isn't the best indicator because there's many other plants around that follow a similar bark pattern, but if you look at the bark of common chokecherry, you'll see that the newer growth is more maroon, and as we get older on the tree, it becomes more gray. So you can see that sort of transition between gray to maroon. Now, just as a final review, with all three branches put together, you can see the Rocky Mountain Maple with the opposite buds, the very red bark, right there. Next to it is the Western Serviceberry. You can see the larger pink-green buds that are adjacent. And next to that, we have the common chokecherry with its small pointed brown buds that are hugging the branch. So that is all three trees side by side.